Congratulations! You made the varsity, the podcast. My name is John Ourand. I am Puck's sports correspondent and the host of this pod. And today, we're going to present what I believe will be the first year in review show for 2025. I convinced three of my Puck colleagues to join me today to come up with the sports media story of the year. We're going to be joined by Julia Alexander, who is one of the smartest minds in the world of streaming. Puck's legal ace, Eriq Gardner, he's also going to join us. For my money, Eriq is the most consequential legal reporter working in media today. And Dylan Byers, who writes Puck's private email in the news business called In the Room and hosts, along with Julia, the great podcast The Grill Room, also is joining us. This one is going to really be a lot of fun. But before we get to what I call Puck's super friends, today is Wednesday, December 3rd, and here's what I'm watching. And for me, it's all about the people who run the biggest media companies that carry your favorite sports. Of course, we're in the middle of a huge sea change in terms of how people watch sports. Amazon is no longer an upstart in this space. It is an established company in sports media and has deals with the biggest leagues like the NFL and NBA. Amazon is even considering picking up the rights to next year's Big Ten championship game from NBC. You also have Netflix, YouTube, Apple. This is a trend towards streaming that has really been happening for a while now. So while that's going on, traditional media companies are going through a bunch of major changes too. Take Warner Brothers Discovery, which owns TNT and TBS and HBO Max, and is the home of popular brands like Inside the NBA. That company is about to be sold to Netflix or to Comcast or to Paramount. Those are the three companies that submitted second bids to buy the company. And it appears that Paramount is a favorite right now, but those types of auctions always are really, really hard to handicap. But the reason I mention it is because this deal will have a huge effect on sports media. TNT Sports, after all, holds a ton of big-time sports rights. Sure, I know it lost the NBA to NBC and Amazon, but it still has baseball through the championship series. It has the NHL, including the Stanley Cup final games, March Madness through 2032. It also has some college football playoff games. College football and basketball as well, those are the crown jewels on the American sports calendar. So what happens to Warner Brothers Discovery is a big deal in the sports community. Then there's Disney. The Wall Street Journal had a really good story on Tuesday on who is likely to replace Bob Iger. The Journal story, and most of the people I talk to, say Josh D'Amaro is a frontrunner. Now, Josh is a guy who runs Disney's parks business, which are doing well for the company right now. Hollywood executive Dana Walden is also said to be in consideration too. But Disney, of course, owns ESPN, and per the story, Disney's head, Jimmy Pitaro, was once a candidate to replace Iger, but now he's seen as someone who's just going to continue to run ESPN. And that's where the questions start. Iger is a big sports fan, and he understands the power of live sports, especially in the current media environment. And he's been a big ESPN supporter as well. Make no mistake, ESPN will be fine. I have a lot of confidence in Jimmy Pitaro, who has run the company for more than 8 years. And even given Iger's interest in sports, this is Pitaro's shop. It has been for a while. Still, it's a legitimate question to wonder how Disney's commitment to sports will change if Josh D'Amaro gets the nod. Okay, now let's get to Puck's super friends, Julia Alexander, Eriq Gardner, and Dylan Byers. Well, I have been looking forward to this for a long time. This is what my hope is. This is the very first year in review of 2025 for sports media, sports business. I'm here with my Puck colleagues, of course, Julia Alexander, Eriq Gardner, Dylan Byers. And we have all been wasting a ton of ink on just the rise of streaming. TV's continuing its downward trend. There's chaos in college. There's, sports betting scandals all over the place. This has been a really busy year and a defining year, I think, for sports and sports media and sports business. And so I want to start with you, Julia. Your sports story of the year, your sports business story of the year. And I do want to tell the listeners, you wanted to do the Toronto Blue Jays, and that offended my Oriole fan heart. I had to veto that one. So what is your sports business story of the year?
Yes, and as your favorite resident Torontonian, I'm showing up in a Yankee sweater, knowing that we were going to be on Nesson. Brought some of the heat early. My sports story of the year is also maybe the dominant cultural story of the year, and it's YouTube's inevitability. And YouTube can mean many things. It can mean YouTube TV, it can mean YouTube primetime channels. That's how people are getting their streaming services now, or it can mean YouTube proper. And I think across the board, YouTube has really shown how inevitable it is to sports media. Start with YouTube TV. Whether it was fights with Disney and NBC Universal, whether it was the fact that it became, I believe, the fourth largest MVPD, still the largest vMVPD, the largest virtual TV service, the fourth largest cable kind of company. I think the fact that live sports is now synonymous with YouTube TV is a major win for Neil Mohan, the CEO of YouTube, who was really dedicated to this package from the get-go of the product being built. I think if you then move into YouTube and you look at what happened with the NFL and the Sao Paulo game, whether or not that game put up the numbers that Roger Goodell over at the NFL or Neil Mohan were hopeful for is still up for debate. But I think the fact that it went really smoothly, the fact that you could get alternative streams with YouTubers, the fact that this showcased a new way to engage with live sports as opposed to just shifting audiences over and engaging with sports in a similar way, really showed how powerful YouTube as a platform could be for younger viewers. And again, on the YouTube Primetime channel, on the YouTube primetime channels standpoint, you also had this ability to start selling these additional streaming services, bringing in additional content for super fans. And so I think YouTube has always been this dominant cultural force for sports. The NFL has an active channel. NBA Commissioner Adam Silver talks a lot about the power of highlights. But in terms of it being the inevitable next wave for how sports rights deals are conducted, for how people watch sports, YouTube is at the top of that chain for me.
Yeah, I certainly have written about YouTube so much more this year than I have in the past. And I do want to fixate on that NFL game and the idea of YouTube, because if YouTube was really interested in sports, it would have been at the table for the NBA. It would have been a little bit more interested in the F1. There have been a lot of big rights packages that have come up that YouTube has taken a pass on. Is that about to change? What did they learn from Sao Paulo? And what was that? 19 million viewers, I think they got on that one, which is a pretty good NFL number. But what did they learn from that? Are we going to see them increasingly at the table for rights deals, or do they not even need that?
I think there's two takeaways from a couple of different sports moments on YouTube. One was proving that they didn't need to bid on a lot of sports. And a great example of why they don't need to do that is a different league altogether, which is Bundesliga, this German soccer league that, independent of YouTube, reached out to a few top YouTubers, so top creators, and said, we want you to be able to live stream some of these Friday night matches because we want to reach younger audiences and we see this as a marketing potential. And if you think about how that deal looks for YouTube, they don't have to put any money down to work with Bundesliga on this. They can take these creators and throw those live streams into YouTube Select. This is kind of the premium ad channel. This would make sure that you'd get some really high CPM ads being thrown on top of this type of coverage. And YouTube can kind of say, we now host Bundesliga matches, but we didn't have to pay for anything. And so I think if you look at what happened with the NFL and what happened there, the big takeaway is that YouTube can make decisions on what type of sports it wants to invest in at an event level, kind of similar to what Netflix is doing. And it can decide where to take the step back and watch as sports naturally come to the platform, and they can better monetize it through its creators. That to me was the number one takeaway from everything that happened with YouTube. Its advantage, as it has been since the service launched in 2006, is its independent creators who have connections to audiences that leagues want to participate with. And so if it's whether it's the NFL and Roger Goodell says we want to have more games here, whether in the future it's kind of more one-off event type gimmicky sports that YouTube wants to bid on in order to have some of those eyeballs exclusively on YouTube, I think the main lesson is they don't necessarily need to have it. They need to get people to open the app more on their TV sets, but that can be done through creators without YouTube having to spend money.
I think one of the reasons I love working with Julia is that I come from such a traditional media background and you come from a streaming background. And I want to stick with that Sao Paulo game real quick because there were a lot of influencers that had their channels that talked that kind of followed the football game. And from my traditional media background, the numbers that they produced in terms of viewership seemed really small to me. Like how did YouTube view that? Was that what they were expecting? Is that really the wave of the future? Or is the wave of the future just trying to collect 19 million people and have them stay for 3 hours or whatever the average length of time was?
One of the great mistakes that I think executives made about streaming, which is true with any type of brand new technology that seems to be the revival a lot of executives want for their future businesses, was this idea that streaming and the easier accessibility and availability for a lot of customers would lead to new fans. It would lead to building audiences. When I think the takeaway that we've had from streaming is that you can shift built-in audiences, but it's really hard to build new audiences. I'll give you two examples. I think if you look at the Sao Paulo game, the viewership on that Friday game was equivalent to about a Thursday night football game. So you were able to shift some of the audience over who were interested, and it might have put up bigger numbers if it was on Sunday, right? It might have put up bigger numbers if it was on even Monday, but this was a Friday game. But I think also if you look at how some of the audiences tuned in for the creators, one of the most popular creators is a guy named I Show Speed. And he averages about 80, 90,000 viewers per live stream when he goes on. He's got millions and millions and tens of millions of followers. And when he live streamed this game, I think it sat around 60 to 70,000. So it was a little bit lower than average, but it was about on par with what his audience naturally comes in as. And I think if you're Neil Mohan, the lesson you take away from that is, can we shift creators' audiences into potentially watching more sports? And can we shift sports audiences into spending more time with our creators? That you create this really healthy ecosystem for people who are coming into YouTube and getting exactly what they want out of sports, out of creators, and out of VOD content well after the fact.
All right, let's move over to Eriq because this is going to fit right in. Not because Eriq's a big fan of my show Speed. Are you, Eriq? Am I misinterpreting this?
Oh, I'm a huge fan.
Okay, good, good. Your story of the year.
So it's a hello Netflix, and I'm not just talking about Netflix here. To build on what Julia says, and I'm not just talking about how many people are watching sports on Netflix because it's still small, and we still have the NFL Christmas doubleheader and a few live event pipelines. But for me, it ties into some structural changes that we're seeing. Every league right now is using Netflix as a stalking horse to raise rights prices. You combine that with what Amazon is doing and what Apple is doing, and it's clear that it's transforming the whole ecosystem for how broadcast television is playing out. We're also seeing exploding valuations for sports franchises, and a lot of that ties back to the fact that there are these streamers in the game now. And looking forward, I think that we're going to see a lot more international at play. It used to be that, a lot of these telecasts and games were ordered around local fandoms. But that was in an age when, mainly we got to watch our favorite team on the local station. Now we're all tuning into, streamers with international footprints, and that, has ramifications too. It changes the way that the leagues cater to their clients to the people who are partnering on the media end. And so I think that when it comes to programming, a lot of these leagues are programming less for the average fan out there, and now programming for how this is going to work best for the streamers. And that's just a trend that's going to continue on and on. It doesn't necessarily matter what the footprint is right this second. What's more important is how it's leading towards a place where there's more, private equity involved. There's more, international sports figures involved, and it's something that's just beginning to build up, and I think it's kind of the transformative moment. We talked about it for a long time. Netflix possibly going into the sports realm. They always denied it. Well, now there's no denying that they're here now. So them, Amazon and Apple, completely changed the game.
Eriq, I got to congratulate you. You just talked about Netflix and their strategy. You never once used the word eventize or anything about the eventize, but Netflix has been slowly doing, the Jake Paul boxing matches or the Christmas Day games, and they're picking off seemingly like one-off events that they can then build around. Do you see that as being a viable sports strategy moving forward, or do you see them tinkering or tailoring with that?
I think it's a stepping stone. I think that they needed to get the live television game right, figure out how advertising was going to work on Netflix. But I think an important moment in Netflix's evolution is how they've incorporated WWE Raw into the platform. I see no reason why they won't be bidding on the NFL when it comes up for a rights package. And like I said, it doesn't even necessarily matter whether they win all these rights things. The fact is that they're there, and the leagues can point to the possibility that Netflix is there to raise everyone else's price. And so, yeah, I think they'll get more involved. How exactly they will get involved, I think that's still to be determined. I still think that they're in their go slow, like let's try things out phase rather than let's do everything big splashy like a Skydance Paramount where they have to just throw money at everything. They want to do it in a smart way, but we definitely know that they're in the sports game now.
Dylan, before we get to your story of the year, I want to get your comments on YouTube and Netflix, because one of the things that I've noticed this year, especially, when Amazon started Thursday Night Football, I kept writing about, like, can they handle it? Can they get 15, 16 million concurrent viewers and be able to handle that? We all remember the Netflix's problems with the Jake Paul Mike Tyson fight and how hard it was for people to get in and not have buffering and to actually watch the fight. And I wrote a ton of stories. Is this going to be a problem for the Christmas Day games? And it wasn't. I mean, are we at a point right now where the streamers are just here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, if there's a through line to all of this, it's that there's a consensus that sports is the coin of the realm for driving audiences, whether you're talking about legacy media or you're talking about streamers, right? And you can look at the numbers that YouTube did in Sao Paulo, and you can say, okay, well, maybe those aren't ideal, but this is a table stakes moment. This is the moment at which everyone's sort of getting buy-in, figuring out how these sports rights work in their ecosystems versus how they worked for some of the older players. And I don't see anyone deciding that it's not worth it. I don't see Netflix, YouTube, Amazon, anyone saying, okay, wait a second, we're this is the wrong place to place our bets. Everybody is 100% in. And I think that as consumers, as NFL fans, as NBA fans, sports fans, start to adapt to a world in which they're like, okay, well, I also need Amazon, I also need YouTube, I also need Netflix. You're going to see those numbers come up, I think, in very meaningful ways. I think we're just in a period of adoption, but we're certainly like we've passed the Rubicon in terms of understanding that these are meaningful assets for these streamers.
The one red flag that I do see is in my hometown of Washington, D.C., where regulators have been making noises about not wanting to see sports leave, quote unquote, free TV or linear television and go to services that, their constituents have to pay for increasingly. Eriq, is that a real problem that leagues should be considered?
Certainly, there's going to be a lot of regulatory action on that, or at least a lot of regulatory noise on that, because a lot of politicians and regulators see that this is an issue that plays very well with the public. It also happens to be a concern of groups like Nexstar and Sinclair, the ones who own the local broadcast affiliates and giants, they want these games. They want the games to stay on, over the air television. And so I think in the coming year, we're going to hear a lot about that. I expect that, things are going to get a little raucous at the time that the NFL's playoff game plays on Peacock, and like a lot of people realize that they can't actually watch it. And it's going to be one of those things. We'll see whether this actually leads to action or whether it's like savings time where like people will like habitually complain about it, but nothing will ever actually happen. It could go either way. But there at least is going to be a lot of noise about this.
My favorite part is when you hear politicians saying, we got to get it back on free TV, like ESPN, instead of going up there, which ESPN obviously is not free TV. Dylan, I want to come to your story of the year, but let's pay the bills first. Let me take a quick break, come back, and then we're going to get your story of the year for 2025. Dylan, your story of the year, sports business wise.
It has to be, I don't want to say the rise because it rose a while ago. I would say the mainstreamification of sports betting and now especially prediction markets. The reason I bring that up, if you go back to what we were talking about before the break, we all agree that sports are central to the media equation, whether you're talking about legacy media, streaming media, whatever. And I like, by the way, that Eriq said earlier, talked about regulatory noise as opposed to regulatory action. I don't think there's any quite like Netflix, YouTube, Amazon. They're not here to compete with Nexstar and Sinclair. Like they're here to just like wipe them out. And there will be a moment sooner rather than later in which I think that we sort of all accept that mainstream media really is those new streamers that we're talking about. But the question is okay, so you take sports and how do you use sports as a way to bring people into the ecosystem or keep them in the ecosystem? But the next question, of course, as we know from covering this business, is of course the question of engagement, time spent. Nothing drives engagement more than people having money on the line. It is a way to keep people engaged down to like whether or not the free throw is going to go in, whether or not, whether or not the field goal is going to get made, the point spread, every aspect of that. And you put this in people's pockets and you give them the opportunity to bet on everything for a penny or a dollar or $1,000 or $100,000. That is a whole new era of engagement. There are going to be a lot of problems that come along with that. There are going to be a lot of safety concerns. I think it's probably wreck some homes, but at the same time, it's going to drive incredible revenue, and it's going to be a massive. It already is a massive business, and it's going to meaningfully change how we think about sports and how we engage with sports. And indeed, we're already seeing the ways in which even the passive consumer, who's just an old-fashioned sports fan who wants nothing to do with betting or prediction markets, is already being subjected to blanket coverage of odds and futures, prediction markets, whatever it is, because it's blanketed at ESPN. It's all over Fox Sports. And so, Julie and I talk about this all the time on my podcast. There was a time not so long ago when Disney said we want nothing to do with sports betting. We're a family values brand. Now all of a sudden it's like a full-scale embrace. And I think, it's interesting, John, earlier when you were talking about some of the stories of the season, and one of the big ones is the sports gambling controversies. And we saw it recently in the NBA with Chauncey Billups and Terry Rozier. And it was so interesting, the timing of that, because you had just hosted your event in the arena in New York, and you had just been talking to the commissioner, Adam Silver, about all of this. And he's very bullish about betting. He's been bullish about betting for a decade. You look at a scandal like that, that scandal is not, that is not a warning sign that betting has limits. That is like 7 or 8 years ago when Uber's autonomous vehicle was involved in a fatal car crash. That's not, that. I don't know if you've been to Los Angeles or San Francisco recently, but Waymos are everywhere. Like that's a sign of its ubiquity and its inevitability. That is not a sign that we are at all like curbing the growth of sports betting and prediction markets. And I think this is going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to grow most robustly in sports, but we're already seeing with things like Polymarket, the way it's growing well beyond sports, even in politics, as Julie and I have also discussed recently. So it's very interesting to think about how that's going to change the nature of sports fandom, of the media equation, and how media organizations handle that. Like I said, there are going to be a lot of safety concerns, and that's going to become a part of their sort of PR strategy and their marketing strategy. And then it's going to be really interesting even to see that the way the coverage of sports changes around that and in ways we're already seeing that happening.
You know, it's so interesting. You mentioned Adam Silver, and he was the first one like a decade ago. I forget how many years ago. He had the op-ed in the New York Times where he called for the legalization of sports betting. And his whole point is that it's the sunshine of legalizing betting that's going to uproot these bad actors. And so a lot of the problems that we're seeing right now, and you mentioned basketball, there's also one in baseball where, you know, the pitcher told people his first pitch was going to be a ball, and he ended up throwing it into the ground, you know, for a ball. And college baseball as well, the same thing. And if you talk to people involved with betting, they insist that you know that there's not more, there aren't more nefarious actors in betting now just because it's legalized. It's just that it's being caught sooner, and so. Really, to anybody, to you, Dylan or Julia, like, what could possibly happen to derail this? Is it because it's affecting all-star players in the NBA? It's affecting, you know, the starting pitchers in Major League Baseball. I'm just trying to figure out what kind of scandal could possibly be out there to create a situation where, you know, regulators do come in and it's more than noise in DC and they do something, or you know, Disney says, boy, we just don't want to be associated with that. Is there anything that's out there that could derail this right now?
Well, look, I think the one thing that is sort of sacred to sports and why we love sports, and especially why we pass the love of sports on to future generations, is because there are aspects of the game, the integrity of the game is in place. And it's the reason why when we see scandals, the reaction is sort of so overwhelming. We'd like to believe at least that we're watching a game in which meritocracy is rewarded. What I would say, though, is those voices you're talking to, and I've talked to some of them myself, that are saying the more you open this up and are able to regulate it, the cleaner this is going to become. And the argument there, which is not, it seems like a very sane argument to me, is that sports betting is going to happen. It's just a question of whether it happens in a sort of open, transparent market or it happens on a black market, right? And it's not a clean argument, because there are all sorts of ways in which you can argue against it. The same way you can argue against the legalization of drugs. Like, it's a tricky argument, but I get their point and I take their point. I think my broader feeling is just there's so much money at stake, and regulation, as we have seen across the media sector, especially across the tech sector, is often so toothless. It just seems impossible for me to imagine that regulation is going to be able to keep pace with the incentives that the industry has to pursue betting. And particularly in this climate that we're living in, which for not to be too broad here, but a sort of Trump era climate, sort of as was on the cover of The Economist the other week, that sort of anything goes America. It's very hard for me to see anyone scaling back sports betting. And by the time we get to the end of this moment, you know, that we're in politically, I think it's too late.
I love that you did bring up Disney, because for goodness sakes, we had ESPN Bet. You know, they actually put their brand along with betting, and there's a reason why. Like, why is the NFL so popular? You know, it's scarcity. You know, they generally play only on Sunday afternoons, but I think it's just the rise of
Mondays and
now
occasionally
it's Fridays. Well, YouTube got Friday, yeah. So, But it's also fantasy football. I was
Yeah.
on Monday night sitting up until the very end. There was a sack at the end that the Patriots got that won me my game, and I was very happy about it. It kept me engaged, and so the idea that these media companies are embracing this is there's an obvious reason why, because it's not just getting people to tune in, it's getting them to tune in for a long time and getting them to watch a Monday night game that they might not have had any interest in anyway. So
I think that's absolutely right. And look, I was just going to say your point about the fantasy engagement is absolutely right. If you get to the end of a season and you have two teams playing each other that are like 3-12, right, or 4-13, whatever it might be, why do you still care about that game? The only reason you care about the game is either because you live in New Orleans, or you've got a fantasy player, or the greatest incentive you can have is because you know that you can make some money. And so these are levels of, these are engagement drivers that I think are on a whole another level than anything that we've seen to date.
Great. Let me take one more quick break, come back, and then I'm going to unveil my story of the year. So all of the reason I especially like what we've done here is because all of our stories of the year have the same sort of through line. And mine is the August launch of ESPN Flagship, which I believe they're calling Unlimited, but we still want to call it Flagship, the standalone app where you don't need to be a bundled subscriber. You don't need to be a cable subscriber, a satellite subscriber in order to get ESPN, which came at the same time as Fox One launched its app as well. And so for me, that was for the longest time, ESPN and Fox were the two companies that were propping up the bundle business, because they didn't allow their programming to leak out into the streaming world. Unlike NBC, which certainly allowed Peacock to carry Sunday Night Football, or CBS, which allowed Paramount Plus to carry a lot of its sports as well. You know, if you wanted to see a sport that was on ESPN, you had to be a bundled cable subscriber. And the idea that ESPN is now going forward and saying, like, you don't need to be a bundled cable subscriber, you can just pay us directly, is a huge step for a company that built itself up through cable, made its billions from these cable contracts, and now is moving forward without cable. And so one part of me believes that this is the actual end of the cable bundle, the idea that you can actually go direct to consumer with ESPN and with Fox. However, Julia, you mentioned with the ingesting deal that YouTube did with Disney and with Peacock as well. This deal, I want to stick with the ESPN more so than Fox. Like, it is propping up. In the end, it's actually propping up the cable bundle more than I was expecting it to be. Because if you are a cable subscriber, you get free access to this app, and so and they're selling the app or access to the app to the cable companies, just like they would sell ESPN or ESPN2 or ESPNU. It's almost like another cable channel that Disney and ESPN is selling into the system that is going to prop up, or at least it's going to keep people tethered to the cable cord. One of the things that ESPN executives have always said is that, when they launch this, they're going after cord nevers rather than cord nevers and cord cutters, rather than people that were already happy cable subscribers. And it sounded like a load of bull to me whenever they would say that. But I think it's actually kind of been true. Julie, I'm curious to get your thoughts on that.
I think Jimmy Pitaro and the team at Disney very much understand that discovery is a very difficult business to crack. This is exactly why Amazon Prime Video channels has really taken off for a lot of streaming services that originally were never going to partner with Amazon. So you think about Peacock and HBO Max and Paramount Plus. They're all now part of the Prime Video channel system, which takes anywhere from a reported 30 to 50% of subscription cut. But it's because they know that being able to direct people to their own apps and being able to engage in a very difficult discovery process of surfacing the types of shows and films and sports that people want is a complicated, costly thing to do. And so I think if you're Jimmy Pitaro or you're Bob Iger, you understand that there is a selection of subscribers and customers who want a very 4D type of streaming experience when it comes to sports. To Dylan's point, they want a lot of betting odds. They want fantasy plays. They potentially want shopping. They want multi-view, whatever it might be. But for a lot of others who want their ESPN to exist in the same system as their regional sports network, as their other content, where they can literally just channel surf through, not being in that system and not collecting, of course, the billions of dollars that cable still provides companies like Disney would just be a miscalculation. Does it mean that ESPN being in the cable system is going to keep the cable system afloat? No, but it's this idea that they can extend the runway briefly while they figure out exactly how many customers they can convert to subscribers versus how many customers they may just lose in the process.
Extend the runway briefly. That's so well put. Dylan, how do you view it in terms of vis-a-vis the cable bundle and ESPN Unlimited?
Well, look, I think Julia gets to a really important point here about discoverability and how you change audience behavior, I think, more than anything. And I think if you look at where we're at, there's a very calculated and I think smart effort by both the commissioners and the media partners to sort of lay your bets across the table, as it were. So you've got you have your deals with legacy players that you maintain for the sake of reach and scale and sort of maintaining the stability of how people access and interact with the league. At the same time, if you're Disney or you're Fox, you know, for not to abuse the metaphor, you know where the puck is going. It's already there, and you have to choose this sort of moment to jump from what has been a behemoth of a business and start figuring out your strategy for what is going to be a smaller, nimbler business in the streaming ecosystem, where you're competing with a lot of different players, and in many cases, players with deeper pockets. And that is a much harder game to play than the sort of glory days of the cable bundle, no question. But you have to do it. And I think that we're sort of at this moment now where you've got bets in both places to sort of maintain what's going on and help bridge your audience from one side to the other. But is the rollout of Flagship or Unlimited and Fox One, is that the story of the year? Absolutely. Is it a sea change moment? Absolutely. In many ways, you could argue it came a little later than it should have. But it's a clear sign of where we're going, and we're going to arrive at a time when I think cable bundles will continue to exist. They will hit their floor. I still get the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal in print every morning. Doesn't mean that print is a thriving business. But this is where the future is headed, and it's just time, and it's adoption at the consumer level. And at a certain point, people are going to realize that it's easier to engage with these streaming services and to have the accessibility across platforms, across devices, than it is to subscribe to the old-fashioned cable bundle.
Got a proper print subscriber on board.
Point,
I'm so impressed, Dylan.
That's right.
But just to Eriq's point previously, I think if you also take into account that these streaming services that come from big pocketed tech companies, which are going to raise the prices of sports rights, if you're ESPN and all you need to make a differentiated product is sports rights, then you need to have cash coming in from somewhere. Otherwise, you're going to lose out on the very sports that are driving subscribers to a very costly app. Running streaming services are extremely costly. Sports rights are extremely costly. So for the time being, if cable revenue offsets some of the losses that come from those costs and makes it so that ESPN can even compete in 5, 10, 15 years, that's an important part of the equation.
Julia, you've seen the numbers. The rollout happened in August. Should the Disney and should Fox, should they be happy with the numbers so far? of subscribers?
Well, well, I think Fox in particular is a really impressive story. I think just under 2 million, I think just under 2 million subscribers, according to Antenna, which is a third party research firm. Those numbers, 60% of it is coming in through Amazon Prime Video channels. I'm assuming the vast majority of that is related to sports and not Fox News programming, although that could also definitely be a driver as well. I think it's an impressive feat, but also Lachlan Murdoch, who's the CEO of Fox, he often says in earnings calls, as I know Dylan probably knows because he follows Fox as a company, he plays down the importance of streaming all the time. He's like, we're not trying to aim for much with this, and we have Tubi, and that's our free streamer, and we're putting stuff there, and we're investing in podcasts, and we're doing other things. So I think it's impressive. And I think ESPN, which is just under Fox One in terms of unlimited subscribers alone, sitting at 3 million if you combine the ESPN plus ESPN, which does not take into account, by the way, those Disney Plus customers or MVPD customers who then rolled into the new product, so it might be a little higher, also impressive. But I think the question, these are rolling out right before football season. As anyone who runs YouTube TV knows, you're going to see high churn in Q1. Right after the football season ends, there's always high churn for a lot of these virtual TV services. So the real test is going to be if those customers stick around in Q2 and Q3.
Yeah, and that is the key, the churn. Eriq, I'm going to give you the last word on this topic.
Last word, I'm not sure exactly what to say, but I think that, ESPN has been a controversial product. I'll put it that way. There were a lot of, I cover, law, and there were a lot of lawsuits that came as a prelude to this product launch, and there are still ones that are ongoing, and it's because it's so mammothly important in the industry, and Disney as a company has such a giant hold on it. It is the engine that where a lot of the entertainment products kind of orient around, and so I think that the growth of this company and of this product is definitely a story that's not just an important one for 2025, but it's interesting to see where it has next.
Well, this was as fun as I was expecting. I know how busy you all are, so I can't thank you enough for the time for joining the Varsity, and hopefully we'll do it again soon. Wow, that was fun. I want to thank my friends Julie Alexander, Eriq Gardner, Dylan Byers for taking the time to join today's pod. You just got a glimpse of what Puck Slack looks like every week. That was a lot of great fun. But I also want to thank you for listening to The Varsity, an Odyssey podcast in partnership with Puck. I also want to thank the executive editors from Puck, that's Gabi Grossman, Ben Landy, John Kelly, and the great team from Odyssey, that's Bob Dapador and Patrick Antonetti. If you like this podcast, make sure to sign up for my newsletter, also called The Varsity. Head over to puck.news and use the code word TheVarsity, all one word, for a 20% discount. And I will see you on Sunday.